Hey everyone, are you planning a trip to Japan? And have you already watched all the videos on the 50,000 things that you're not supposed to do when you go to Japan? And you're probably feeling a little bit intimidated as you do. Well, it's true. Japan is definitely a different culture and they have a lot of things that you shouldn't do. What we're talking about is social norms. If you violate these things, well, nobody's going to arrest you on the street, but it is just violating their culture.
Japan with Dennis. I'm Dennis. I lived in Japan, I speak the language, and I love the Japanese culture. I'll share with you tips you need to know before you travel to Japan and key cultural things you need to do while there. I'll show you where you can go and what you can do to get off the tourist track and experience the real Japan. And learning a few Japanese words and phrases can only enrich our experience. 日本に行きましょうか?
Well, having lived in Japan, I can appreciate some of the feelings that you have. It definitely is a different culture, but there are reasons why they do these things. And I'd like to just take a moment and talk about some of the key things that you're not supposed to do in Japan, but not just as a list of rules, but also the reason why you're not supposed to do those things. And we understand the culture just a little bit better when we go to Japan. Not only can we obey those rules, but we understand why we are doing it. We're honoring their culture. And as we do, they'll honor us back. And so join me as we talk about a few things that you're not supposed to do in Japan, but also why. And if you'll stay tuned, I'll also talk about a few things that you should do in Japan that will definitely honor their culture and, well, really is just kind of fun. And then at the very end, I'll give you a bonus, as I do in all my videos, a few Japanese words and phrases that will help you in Japan when you visit. If you keep watching these videos, well, heck, you might just become fluent in Japanese. Well, maybe not fluent, but you'll definitely learn a lot of Japanese. And really, the language is also part of the culture. Well, as the Japanese would say, じゃあ、何かやってはいけないという文化的な規則はありますか? 何ですか? じゃあ、学びましょう. All right, the first thing we need to talk about is not eating and walking down the street at the same time. In Japan, they don't walk and eat at the same time. And you may have heard of that rule before, but essentially, the Japanese consider that somewhat not just rude, but a little bit gross. So what's the reason why? Well, the reasons are really quite interesting. The first reason is that they believe that you can't keep all the food in your mouth. So as you're walking and eating, some of that crumbs, even if it's just crumbs, are going to fall to the ground. And as you know, that's not clean to them. If you've been to Japan before, if you don't know this, their streets are impeccably clean most of the time. And so they live in a very dense environment. They're around a lot of people. One of their compensations is that they keep things very, very clean. Typically, if you go into a Japanese apartment, they don't have a lot of stuff like that the people in the United States have, or all over the world. We have lots and lots of stuff. They don't do that. And so they have very few things. They keep things very neat and orderly, and even their streets are like that. So it might seem like a small thing that part of a cookie falls on the ground, but think about it. You're not going to bend down and pick it up. You shouldn't. If you did, then you'd be touching the street, and that's kind of gross, and that's kind of dirty. But if you leave it there, then that's also kind of dirty. And so the first reason is that they think it's unsanitary. Now, the second reason is that they can smell the food and maybe even hear you eat. This is very interesting because if you've ever been in a ramen shop in Japan, you'll find that they slurp their ramen like crazy, and you can hear them like from all over the place. You can hear them eating that food. Actually, if they slurp, that's kind of complimentary to the chef. It means it's very, very good. And then, of course, you can get these smells as soon as you get in this restaurant, but they believe in compartmentalizing smells. And so even though in a restaurant you may smell ramen or something good, some good food, they actually don't want to be able to smell that in the train or on the street, and they can smell that. One thing about Japanese people is that their smell is very sensitive. Oh, it's the same sensitivity as ours, but they're so used to not having very many smells that they smell. So for instance, this is something else we'll talk about later. If you think about wearing cologne, don't in Japan. Don't wear it at all, because what smells good to you does not smell good to them. And what smells subtle to you, which you can barely smell because you're so used to it, they can smell it a mile away. Not a mile, but they can definitely smell it from the other side of the restaurant. And so you'll find that if you're eating at a restaurant, you have a lot of cologne on, and there's a bunch of Japanese people sitting around you, you'll find that they're starting to move. They'll try to move away from you. Well, that's also true that whenever you're eating on the street, you have food. Technically, they can smell and they like to protect their space from not only sound, cleanliness, dirtiness, but also smells. So, smells another reason. And then finally, there's the third reason. I think this is the most interesting reason, and it really tells you so much about the Japanese culture. The problem is when you're eating food casually while walking down the street, what you're not doing is showing respect to the food. Now, I know that sounds a little funny. It's not like the food is aware. However, what they're really trying to show is that they have gratitude. They like to demonstrate gratitude and even a type of honor to food. Now, if you'll think about that, you'll see that all over the culture. So, for instance, when you look at a plate of Japanese food, pictures of it, it's beautiful. It's very specially prepared. It's well balanced on the plates. The colors are magnificent. Even if they make a bowl of ramen, they put things in just at the right time, and they might have a little shrimp peeking out, and they might have some cabbage arranged in just a certain way. You may not think about this, but they think their food is supposed to look really, really good. And they do that because they want to honor the food. It's their way of being, well, kind of like saying grace. And so they will honor the food by making it pretty, and then they're thankful for it. Well, as we're walking down the street eating a corn dog or whatever, and stuff's falling out of our mouth, then what we're not doing is honoring the food in a proper way. And so it's really all about that kind of honor. So those are three reasons why we don't eat while walking down the street. Now, there are some exceptions to this. And really what I mean by that is that there are some areas that are an exception. One area is anytime you're in what's called a matsuri. A matsuri is a festival of sorts, and whenever there's a festival, just like you go to a carnival or something, and there's a lot of food carts and places to eat, they will accept that. You're standing and you're eating, but even still, what you'll find is that there'll be a little bit of place, a little bit of pocket of a place right next to that food cart where people are standing and eating. What they're probably not doing is walking very far while eating. They're probably not going to do that. Now, you may not be at a festival, but let's say you're in downtown Tokyo, or you're in some place where there's some nightlife and you're going to see some food trucks, some food booths. There, just right along that pathway in between the food booths on that street, you might see some Japanese people walking and eating, especially young ones. But if they're doing it, then you can do it. Now, this is interesting because it's not to say that the Japanese people don't need to eat while trying to commute to work. They do, and so they do it all the time, but they do specific things. One thing that you might see, especially if you're in downtown Tokyo or some other place, is some young Japanese person who's working like 1,000,000 hours a week. They're hungry. They're on their way to work. There's a street vendor there, so they get the food. And then they need to keep progressing. But what they'll kind of do is they'll kind of walk really close to a wall. They may even stop and look at the wall. They're like this close, and they'll take a bite. They're trying to do that in a very simplistic way so that people can't see it, in a discreet way. And so you'll see that they do that. But one thing you'll definitely not want to do is just be casual about food and walk down the street and eat at the same time. Try to stop. If there's a place that you can kind of hide away and eat just a little bit, that's something that you can do. There's one other thing that they do. You probably won't want to do this, is you'll find that they crouch down. They think if they're sitting, they're not actually sitting on the ground, but they're crouching down very, very, very low. Their knees are used to it, so they can do that. Then they think that that's okay, and they might have a really quick bowl of ramen or something they bought at the 7-Eleven, and you can do that too. So when you go to Japan, don't eat while walking because it's dishonorable to the food. It's a little bit dirty. It's not sanitary, and it also exhibits the smells and the smells of the food everywhere, and they really don't like that. And so we try not to do that. If they see you doing that, they're certainly not going to say anything. Their culture is very, very kind, but you may find out that they're walking really far from you around the street. And as an American or as somebody from a different country, you may think, I don't care. I do the way I want to. But when we're in Japan, we like to honor their culture. And so that's number one. All right, the next thing we want to talk about has to do with money. Now, Japan is a very cash-intensive society, which is very interesting. They're so technologically advanced in many ways, and yet very few places will take credit cards. They just don't set up the infrastructure to do that. And so they take a lot of cash. Be sure you manage cash in Japan properly. You're always going to have cash with you. Just to give you an idea, though, if you stop a Japanese on the street, don't do this, of course, but if someone becomes your friend and you find out how much cash they have, it's not uncommon that the average Japanese person is leaving their home carrying 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 equivalent dollars. It's going to be in yen, of course, but they'll carry many hundreds of dollars with them all the time because it's very much of a cash society. But there's a couple of things with cash that we need to understand. And one is that we try not to hand cash directly to people. They don't like to take cash directly from your hand to their hand. Now, if you get into why, it does have to do with a type of an honor system. So if you're paying for something, what you'll see is even at the store or at a booth where you're buying tickets, what you'll see is there's a little tray. And so don't hold out the money to them, but take the cash and put it in the tray. Then they will take the tray and take the cash out. Now, there's something else that goes on that's very, very interesting. And that is that when you do put money, when you handle money and you're having to hand it to the tray, sometimes you might have to hand it to somebody. To be honoring, they will not do it with one hand. And so if they have some money, they will hold the money in two hands, and then you hand it over with two hands, and they will reach out and probably bow and grab it with two hands and then take the money from you. One thing that'll definitely happen if you are paying by credit card, same thing. You're going to want to hold your credit card with both hands, hand it out to them, and you might even bow a little bit. They will definitely bow their head, and they will reach out and say, arigato gozaimasu, and they'll take your card, your credit card, with two hands, and then pull it over. There's something, just some honor that they care about when they do that. And so that's number two. And then closely related to that, this is kind of interesting, is that Japan is not yet a tipping society. And so you might think, well, that's okay. I want to be nice. I'm going to give them a few extra bucks. Who doesn't like a few extra bucks? Well, I got to tell you, this is going to be kind of weird. The Japanese people don't want your few extra bucks. That's because they think there's a social contract. So when you come into a ramen shop or a little restaurant and you have a good meal and you want to be thankful for it, there's a different way to thank them for that. I'll talk about that. But what you don't do is leave them a tip. If you do, they may very well find that confusing or even offensive. When I say confusing, you might find that a Japanese person is chasing you out the door with your money because they think that you forgot it. Or they know you didn't forget it, but they don't want to be treated like that. They want to maintain the honorable social contract. If that bowl of ramen was going to be 850 yen and you paid 850 yen, that's it. That's good enough. So what you can do is just thank them for the meal, and you can say it was delicious. Something I'll talk about later, by the way, is if they ask you how the meal is, that's always the answer. They do not have a culture of soft criticism. In the United States, if somebody says, how was your meal? You might say, it was pretty good. It just wasn't as warm as I wanted it to be. If you did that to a Japanese person, they would get the funniest, strangest look on their face because they're not used to receiving any kind of criticism at all. And what you're supposed to just say, that was the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. And the one thing that you can say was, "Mo sugoku oishii yo," and just express that it was very, very delicious. Or in English, you can say that as well. They'll probably understand you. Very, very delicious. Just say positive things. And so that's what you can do to thank them for their service and thank them for their meal. All right, and that's number two. All right, now I want to talk about a third thing, and this one's very peculiar, but I'm going to talk about it because Americans and probably people from all over the world come to Japan, and many, many people make this mistake, and it is a fairly critical issue. You won't think anything of it, but it'll turn their stomach if you do this. And that is that you're often being given a bowl of rice, and you're given chopsticks. Now, they call those chopsticks hashi. They like to honor them, so they might say ohashi. Anyway, the chopsticks, the hashi, what do you do with those things? Well, you don't just set them on the table because the table may not be clean, and you're putting that in your mouth. Also, there may be some kind of a meal there that you're sharing, so you're coming close with your chopsticks to other people's food, so you definitely wouldn't want to put that on the table. But here's the most important part, and I talk about this because I have made this mistake. In fact, many, many people do make this mistake. It seems nice that if you have a bowl of rice, that you just take your chopsticks and you stick it in the rice, and now they're kind of standing up. Sounds like an okay thing to do, right? Very much not an okay thing to do. In fact, when I did it one time in Japan, the Japanese person that I was with literally practically flew over the table and grabbed my chopsticks out of the bowl. It happened so fast that rice just went flying everywhere because it was highly, highly offensive. Now, he was trying to protect me. But why is it that they're not supposed to stand your ohashi, your hashi up in your rice. And it has to do with that's how they honor their dead. In many households, there is for lack of a better word, a piece of furniture called a butsudan, or at least an area that every morning they honor their relatives. They have pictures of their relatives. And then on special occasions, they may even feed them. Now, when they do feed them, they may stick a bowl of rice there. It's going to be the best rice that they can possibly buy. And that's when the hashi might be stuck in the rice. The chopsticks are floating there as if they're being eaten or being used by the dead, by their dead. And so whenever you're outside of that environment, that sacred situation, sticking your chopsticks inside and suspending them in rice is a bad idea. So never, ever do that. All right, now that we've talked about many of the things that you shouldn't do in Japan, and trust me, there are many, many more, and we'll cover those in other videos, not just what you shouldn't do, but why you shouldn't do those. Keep in mind that as you want to go to a country like Japan, one of the goals that you'll have is to understand the culture and participate in that culture. There's different levels of participating in a culture. And one might include just going over there and looking at the temples, looking at the history. And maybe for you, that's the kind of cultural aspect that you want. However, I have found that to really understand and participate in the culture of a country, you have to be able to attract people and talk to Japanese people. Now, many of them know a little bit of English, so they can talk to you. I happen to speak Japanese, and so I can go a little bit deeper with those. And so that's what we can do. However, if you think about trying to break all the social norms and have a relationship, that's where you're going to find that that's very difficult. In fact, you'll probably never know because the Japanese people will be so nice to you. They're not going to be mad at you visibly for breaking their social norms. They'll just stay away from you and they won't talk to you. So one of the great compelling reasons to keep their social norms and to do other things that I'll reveal to you now that help you build that relationship is so that they interact with you and you get to know the culture just a little bit more. All right, so there's a couple of things that I want to share with you that you should do in Japan. And one thing that you should do is compliment everything that you possibly can. Now, there are some things that you should compliment and some things that you shouldn't, so we'll talk about that. But the two main things that you can compliment somebody for that Japanese people really appreciate, one is food. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the other one is just working hard. Yeah, I know that's kind of an interesting thing, but they really take it to heart when you tell them that they're a hard worker and you can appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about food for just a minute. Whenever food comes out, there are some things you're going to say. And if you stay to this end of the video, I will talk about some of those words and phrases that you should say when they bring you your food and when you've finished your food that is highly complimentary to them, makes them feel warm, fuzzy feelings when you say these things, especially if you try to say them in Japanese. When you say a little bit of Japanese in their language, and even if you hack it up a little bit, they doubly appreciate that you're trying to honor their culture. And then they're more interested in you. They might ask you questions back, and they might even invite you to do something with them. I'm getting ready to go to Japan in just a few days, in fact, and I'm going to go to my Christian church there. And I want to have relationships developed so well at the church that maybe, just maybe, some Japanese family will invite us to dinner. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but if they invite us to dinner and I end up in a Japanese home sitting with them at dinner, now I'm in the Japanese culture, and that's always my goal whenever I go over. All right, so there are some phrases that you should use to compliment the food, and what you don't want to do typically is that Japanese don't need to have their service complimented. So in the United States, we might go out to and eat, and then we might leave a tip. We don't do that in Japan. We talked about that. And we might also say, "You've gave great service." In Japan, that's not really something that we say. Instead, we might say, "You are such a hard worker." And that's a very indirect way of saying you gave great service. So compliment food, tell them it was delicious. Even if you thought it was a little okay, even if it wasn't your palate, you say it was super delicious. I'll teach you the words on that in just a moment. And the other thing is, of course, is to say that they were a hard worker. Tell them that they're a hard worker and that you appreciate that. That's kind of an indirect way of recognizing their service anyway. All right, those are the two things that you should do. But now you're going to need to stay to the end of this video here. In just a minute, we'll talk about the Japanese that you need to know, the phrases and the words to tell them that the food was good, and also to say that you're a hard worker, which is your equivalent to complimenting their service. All right, as promised, let's talk about a little bit of Nihongo, or that's Japanese, some phrases and some words that you can use to endear the Japanese people to you, to compliment them, and make them open up just a little bit more to you so they don't think you're just some weird gaijin, which is a foreigner, that they are willing to serve, they're willing to take your money, and they're willing to give you service. But what you really want is more than that. You want them to be interested in you. If they're interested in you and talk to you even just a little bit, then you can be interested in them, and they'll have fun. They'll have fun talking to you. All right, so the first thing that you can do is in a food setting. I want to teach you just a couple of things that would be very, very normal for you to do. And that is, if you're in a restaurant and somebody gives you the food, or you see the food, somebody puts it in front of you, a really common thing to say is, "Oishii so desu." Now, oishii, you may know, means delicious. And that's something you can say after a meal, that something was oishii. We'll talk about that. But oishii so desu. Des means is, and so means, well, it's kind of like in English. It is so. So it is oishii looking is what you're saying. And so, oishii so desu. Notice with a lot of the phrases that I say, and you'll hear this in Japan a lot, I can't really describe why, they put a little right at the beginning. So they'll say, ja, or So they'll say, the food comes, and you'll say, oishii so desu. And then that's a very huge compliment. What you're saying is that the food looks delicious. Remember, we said that Japanese people really focus on the way their food looks. They want it to be very, very pretty. And so the first thing you say is that it looks pretty. That's almost better than complimenting its taste, that the food is pretty. So, oishii so desu. Now, the other thing that you can say right before you partake, I'm going to use that word partake because I'm going to give you the literal translation of that in Japanese right before you eat, is it's very common for Japanese people to say, itadakimasu. That's itadakimasu. Now, you'll say it a little bit faster, itadakimasu, and you can kind of stretch out the mas there a little bit. That really translates to, I humbly partake. And that's the equivalent in the United States and other cultures. Essentially, is almost just being very grateful. They may even put their hands together and say, itadakimasu, I'm getting ready to eat this food. It's equivalent maybe to saying grace or to expressing gratitude, saying a prayer. Depends on the culture that you're from. But it is a moment where they stop before they eat the food, they recognize it, and they're saying they humbly partake. So ingrained is this statement to a Japanese person that you might sometimes be sitting in a little ramen place, and there'll be one Japanese guy in the corner, and no one can hear him. But if you listen closely, before he takes a bite, he might mumble under his breath, itadakimasu. So it's really just part of their culture. But it's definitely the kind thing to do. It's showing humility toward the food that you're about to eat. And if somebody hears you as they give you the food, you pick up your chopsticks, you're getting ready to eat, it's okay. They're going to listen to you. You're going to say, itadakimasu, I humbly partake. And so those two food things, oishii so desu and itadakimasu, are two things that you can use in Japan to really endear them to you. Now, in Tokyo, probably there's a lot of gaijins, foreigners around, and they're used to them trying all kinds of Japanese things. And they'll still appreciate that. But as soon as you leave Tokyo and go to a little restaurant, sometimes you're going to be out there where there's nobody else. When they hear you trying to say these words, even if you mess it up a little bit, they'll smile and know what you mean, but their heart will be pricked and they'll be interested in you. Sometimes they'll want to talk to you. Maybe after your meal, they'll come ask you a few questions about America or whatever. And then you can ask them a few questions about Japan. And then that's when you get to know the culture just a little bit more. Okay, now there is one other thing that I used to use this word in Japan. It's a little bit old now. And whenever somebody's working hard, so you go out of a store and you know that somebody's working hard and you just want to acknowledge that they're a hard worker, they see that as an extreme compliment that they're a hard worker. They like the idea of just being useful to society. And so when you say you're a hard worker, then they get all warm and fuzzy inside. There's an older term. I'm going to teach it to you anyway, just in case you hear it. The older people will like this a little bit better. And that's this. Gokuro-sama desu. Gokuro-sama desu. And you're just saying you're a hard worker. The other one that's a little bit more common among young people is skare-sama desu. The word scaretta means tired. What you're really saying is that you're a tired person. That sounds like an insult in any other language. But if you say you're working in a tireless way and you're tired, so skare-sama desu. Hi, and when you say that, then they accept that as a compliment. All right, those are just a couple of things that you should do. And then, of course, we've talked about things that you shouldn't do. And we've talked about some of the Japanese that you'll need in order to endear the Japanese to you as you are in Japan. And if you're not going to Japan, well, at least you can use them to seem cool to your friends. Everybody's going to think you're fluent if you say just a few of those things. All right, this is Japan with Dennis. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos. Ja, mata!